I really contemplated starting this episode by singing "You Don't Bring Me Flowers," but then I didn't. And you're welcome, America. You're welcome. We have because Kerry's not here, have the great opportunity to talk to the folks at Westerlay Orchids. This is in Southern California. It's a big orchid company. Almost 4 million orchids sold this year. Any good year, they'll get a 3 million out of them. We have Jeff Karpman, Director of Sales, and Grace Hanna, the e-commerce specialist on. We're going to talk about orchids. We're going to have a plant experience. So buckle up, because who knows? I don't know half a thing about. I read The Orchid Thief. That's it. That's all I got. Susan Orleans. That's all my background. So we're going to get into this together and learn all about orchids.
Welcome to the Backpack Show with your hosts, Chris Brogan and Kerry Gorgone. Boom shakalaka!
And welcome to the show. So glad that you're here. I'm so happy you could be here for this. Jeff Karpman and Grace Hanna are going to join me. We're going to talk all about orchids. You know more than I do. All of you do. So we're going to do that. I've got a couple ad reads I got to do at the very beginning.
Guests of the show stay at the inconveniently located from downtown or anywhere, never to be confused with luxurious and never updated FDR Hotel, located somewhere off Highway 84 near an old gas station with a burned out van parked out front with a for sale sign.
If you want to make a show just like this yourself, you can. We're sponsored by StreamYard. Go to cbrogan.me/StreamYard. You can have a really cool video show. You can push all the buttons, especially if your co-host goes off and does other things. Hey, we're sponsored by the .online domain. That's why you can go to the backpackshow.online, because we're cool like that. But if you want your own .online, you can have orchids.online. Why not? cbrogan.me/online. Use the code Chris in all caps. I'm going to do the rest of the ad reads a little bit later, and I realized I didn't turn off my AC because I'm a bad human being. Hi, Janice. Thanks for wandering in. Good to see you. Hope everyone else is doing well as well. I'm going to grab Jeff and Grace, and we're going to start talking about plants. Jeff Karpman, Grace Hanna, how the heck are you?
Great.
So, are you not sure how you're doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, just checking. So, like I said, I am orchid virginal here. You can tell me anything and I'm going to believe you. You put out in the market over 3 million, heading towards 4 million orchids a year. Talk to me, maybe Jeff, a little bit about what's going on with that, and who buys orchids, and how do you get a big stake like that in this industry?
Well, the company's been around since 1978, so it's definitely not an overnight success story. There's a lot to do when it comes to building an organization of the size, and of course, it being a family-run company. This is the second generation going after Joe, the owner, passed it to his son, Twan Overgog, and it's just a day in, day out endeavor like agriculture is, and there's a big staff of people who we really count on to make the wheels of progress work and run. And in fact, it takes about 15 to 18 months from the time that we receive a flask plant in from overseas before you can actually purchase it at retail. So it takes quite some time. I think that's the thing that most people are surprised about, is just the length of time it takes to grow an orchid from flask to finish.
18 months is pretty intense. And that means that, the way you plan for abundance, or, hey, we're doing great with the blue ones, we need some more blue ones, and that sort of thing. It's a little harder to kind of do your planning around that kind of a cycle. I imagine that's different than what had been doing before. Jeff, what can you say about having to plan around an 18-month growth cycle to tie to your sales plans?
It's challenging, but I think that the industry is built around it. So there's a lot of inherent acceptance of the fact that it takes quite some time to do it. So all of our partners help us to plan out a good 6 months to 12 months when it comes to a sales plan, production plan. But you are correct. I mean, if you want to make any changes, really, down to the varieties, color, assortment, price points, it really is a slow moving ship. So it's not a turn on a dime situation like I've experienced with prior industries that I worked for. So being in the floral industry, it's fun, it's exciting, it's challenging, everything that you wake up in the morning to do.
I like that sentence. Grace, with the sense of e-commerce and all that, it's a little different to move a live plant around. What else is different or important about understanding how to set up a site for this? How do you make sure that Westerlay gets what they need on the distance thing, especially with that little setback we all had last year?
Sure. So plants are one of the most popular items right now, both at the grocery store level and then also through e-commerce. And so setting up a site that effectively communicates what the customer would be receiving and also, navigates the shipping logistic challenge that is kind of inherent with shipping plants across a large span, like our current shipping window. So communicating all of that in a website is really important for this industry. And that's been something that has been a focus of ours since COVID began.
That has to have been a quick thing to be spun up. How much time did you have between quick, it turns out we really need this, to the product had to be ready to run?
So I'll let Jeff speak to this a little bit because the company actually began this journey before I joined them. And I was a little bit late to the game, but Jeff can jump in and talk about how they got started.
Super.
Yeah. It was actually a pretty funny story. So it was March 14th, which happened to be my birthday, and it was over the weekend, and the world kind of stopped. We started getting a bunch of calls saying, all the DCs are closed, all the logistics channels are shut down, trucking is going to cease, all the distribution is going to cease, and so it was a real fire drill to decide, what we're going to do and what's going to be the span of time that things are going to be disrupted. So. The first 2-3 weeks were just sort of feeling things out. Where is this journey going to go? And I'm sure everybody can think back to the first, couple of weeks of COVID, where you're like, you had no idea where it was going to go. And then once sort of the norms and things were established as the safety protocols and what have you, people sort of carried on with their lives about, midsummer. But so about 3 weeks after COVID hit, we had a lot of plants that were in the stream that had no place to go. And so we just thought, let's rally the troops and let's build a website and let's promote the product in a more philanthropic way. So the initial website was all about selling plants at cost, giving gifts. So we promoted a box of orchids. At the time it was called Box of Orchids, where you could send a box of orchids at cost to anybody on the West Coast, show some gratitude. We would insert notes, hang in there, we love you, etc. And then on the other side of things, on the more industrial side, in a larger scale, we reached out to as many first responders and institutions that we felt would benefit from just receiving some free plants. So we reached out to pretty much every major hospital and institution on the West Coast that we could ship to, and we ended up shipping over 100,000 orchids. As donations to USC, Cedars-Sinai, Dignity Health, across the board, and it was obviously challenging, but it was one of the more rewarding things that I've ever been through. It was pretty cool.
Seems pretty intense. I mean, the whole fact that, like you said, it's all living product. It's rolling no matter what, and all of a sudden the world goes kablooey. Next thing you know. You've got a lot of these things. You have to decide what to do with them. So you decide quick, let's be, philanthropic about it and make sure that some people have access to it. Words are coming in about the fact that orchids are a little difficult to get to rebloom and whatnot. And Elizabeth says she can't even imagine shipping them. So do you want to talk a little bit about the nature of your plants and what it takes to make such a product exist in this world?
You can take this, Grace.
Sure. Yeah. So I can speak a little bit to the shipping and like how to care for your orchid sort of question. Orchids are one of the most difficult things I've ever come across to have to ship, if I'm being completely honest. And I was talking to Jeff about this in the office the other day. It's a bulky, lightweight item that is alive and fragile all at the same time. And you have to ship this across multiple different climate zones, and it's kind of a pain. But what we've worked with, we've been ironing out the kinks of the shipping logistics and come up with a good way to securely fasten the plant to the box and make sure that the ceramic container that it's held in is also, wrapped appropriately. We use kind of a cotton batting substance to hold the flowers in place to minimize damage. So that's another thing that we use. And in terms of shipping our whole boxes of orchids, we've been really fortunate to work with a third-party shipping logistics company that will ship them upright. And so I think as shipping's gotten more advanced in the last couple of years, and especially with COVID kind of expanding how many people are getting into that, the shipping has gotten better.
On the one hand, you say that about advanced. On the other hand, I've seen some delivery people just wing boxes up over fences, crazy stuff. And I haven't, as you're saying all this, I'm looking at this page, I'm looking at these plants, and I'm thinking, you're going to crack a lot of necks on these things. It's nothing good's going to happen. There's so many bad ways you could break one of these. Is there a massive amount of breakage in customer service issues, or was there, and you're starting to get mega good at doing this, that they arrive unsullied?
So there is definitely a high scrap rate, especially at first. And that is something that we mostly ironed out with test shipments to family and friends primarily, to figure out, exactly how we needed to package correctly. Something that people will do is we call it the 3-foot drop test. And so you have to be able to drop it and kick it around at least 3 feet above the ground, because that's typically what a shipping company will do when they drop it on your doorstep. And so if it doesn't withstand that, it's probably not going to withstand the whole transit process. And so it looks a little bit violent to be just dropping boxes off, a ladder or whatever in your warehouse. But it's an important step in making sure that the plants will actually arrive to the customer. I will say that we have to build in a certain amount of scrap, and also we have to think through, particularly with weather challenges. So if it's really hot, for example, shipping to the Pacific Northwest this past week, we had to hold some shipments. And that's something that you don't really have to do in maybe a houseware industry or something with more of a standard product. The weather really does impact us.
I was just hearing that Portland, Oregon's power lines are starting to melt, and they're just like, what do you do?
It's crazy.
So how are you going to get a very delicate plant, help me out again. It's Phalaenopsis.
Phalaenopsis. Yep.
Phalaenopsis. That is a delicate little beastie. And again, as I'm looking at it, it's a premium product. I mean, one of these plants could be $40, $50. They could be $100 and something dollars. And my guess is that if you're going to get a whole box of them in, even if you're putting those to a grocery store somewhere on the way, I mean, you're really putting a lot of product in a lot of other people's hands. You mentioned about scrap and all that. Well, one of the other things that you're known for, though, is being a pioneer in environmental and also sustainability practices. Does that extend all the way to the delivery? I mean, what do you do to kind of make this world a better place for your little guys before they get into other people's hands?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do from the initial starting of growing the product all the way to when it ships. We have low pesticide use, water reclamation. We're installing a solar array at our facility. We've switched from single-use plastic products to paper sleeves for the majority of the product that ships in. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do. We have a carbon footprint tracker. So we signed up for Carbon Footprint, which is a company that tracks your carbon emissions, and we've purchased some offsets to service some underserviced areas in the world to help offset the carbon that we do use. But we try our best to try to look at the entire supply chain and say, what can we do to minimize our impact on the environment. We're going to be using our first made in the USA ceramic pots on our products. So that's happening now. So that's going to cut down on a lot of the ocean freight carbon, and we're continually looking down the road. In 2025 to 2026, we're going to be opening up a new facility in Port Hueneme, which is about 25 minutes southwest of our current location. And the goal is to be carbon neutral And from our experience, it's going to be the first facility on the West Coast that's going to be carbon neutral from our market sector. So we're pretty excited about that. And like I said, it's one of our main tenets and core values is sustainability. So we do what we can to really make an impact.
That's impressive, especially the whole point about cutting down on things like the overseas in the Pacific delivery and all that sort of thing. I mean, that's a pretty big undertaking to go for. How big are these facilities that I'm looking at? How much acreage is it to grow all of this and maintain it?
The total square footage, I'm sure the owner is going to kill me for not getting this exactly right.
No,
but
I get it wrong, because how are we?
Yeah, I believe it's 800,000 square feet of greenhouse is the number. Yeah.
800,000 square feet of greenhouse. And I keep pulling out these pictures just because they're all pretty intense to look at. One thing I wanted to swap to, this has nothing to do with the question that came before it. Grace, you said that in your spare time, you're starting to grow some plants in your garden, in your backyard. Aren't you sick of plants by the time you get home? Don't you just want to kick a bunch of dandelions in the face or something like that by the time you get home?
I think I used to be, when I worked in the plant industry, formerly with roses, I never wanted to see them when I was at home. But since COVID started, like a lot of people have kind of gotten into plants. I've kind of started enjoying them as well. Plants have always been something that my grandparents and my parents were really interested in, and I kind of grew up around, but wasn't particularly interested in. But I've really enjoyed kind of getting my hands dirty and being out in the garden, and also having houseplants. It's been really rewarding to just watch stuff slowly grow during COVID. I think it's been kind of a nice outlet for me. Yeah.
I love it. Now, I have to imagine, and again, I told you ahead of time, I confessed, I don't know anything, but I've got to imagine that there are trends and things like that in orchids. Like, well, suddenly pink's a big deal. What are the trends? What do you see out there? What are people looking at or not looking at when it comes to this sort of thing? And what's new and wild in orchids, or how much of this is just every day the same?
I think the two biggest trends, people are spending a little bit more for each purchase. So what we call a garden, which is not a single orchid, it's an orchid that's mixed with other products. So it could be multiple orchids, or it could be an orchid and then another green plant or some foliage or accessories. So garden purchases have risen pretty dramatically, and I think it's just people are a little bit more apt to spend more money on their home environment to make it look nicer, and they want something that's a little bit more grand for maybe their centerpiece or their island or their coffee table. So that's definitely a trend. And then when it comes to innovation, we developed a product called a bramble, which is really unique on the market, and it's a standard 5-inch orchid that's trained to grow how orchids grow in the wild. So in the wild, orchids don't grow upright. Gravity takes effect, and they sort of grow more low to the ground. We train the orchid spikes, vis-a-vis like bamboo stakes in order to hold them upright to get that vertical look. But the bramble is intended to sort of mimic sort of how it looks in nature, and it's been a real hit. So that's probably the fastest growing. It's also the most complex, and so from a distribution and from an exclusivity standpoint, I don't think that there's many people in the whole country that grow them like we do.
There's no one doing brambles. Who's even hanging orchids these days? I mean, this is craziness. By the way, you said something about maybe 800,000 square feet or whatever. By context, a football field is 57,600 square feet. That's multitudes of football fields in size, is what you're saying is working the Westerlay Orchids game. That's intense.
Yeah. If you want to impress somebody, I mean, walk them into a big greenhouse. It's something that's awe-inspiring if you haven't been in one before. It's pretty cool.
I'm looking all through the Instagram, and again, I'm a big, stupid, not smart guy about it. I'm looking to find your brambles, but all I keep finding are just different ways to present, what to me would sort of look like, the same old thing a slightly different way, but it's not. There's just so many various ways that it's being put together. One question I have is that there's what gets put together by you there and sort of in concept and all that. Some amount of these must go to orchid artists and orchid designers and interior people. Do you ever get to see your plants used in interesting and crazy ways out there in the world?
So I work with quite a few florists who are customers of mine, and they do some pretty incredible orchid displays. They make these huge, grand like arrangements, or they'll do like these wedding arches are a really big deal in the floral world now. And I've seen some really cool ones done with orchids, typically white orchids. And so, yeah, people will hang them and they'll kind of integrate them into other big displays, and they look really cool. So. Yeah.
That's pretty nuts. It's interesting to imagine that there's so many ways to put them all together. And again, I'm sifting through Instagram while everyone's just waiting and watching the interview, and I'm just trying to pick out and just show all these different ways you've had a way to display them. I have to do a quick couple of ad reads, so I'm going to put you backstage for 45 seconds. Don't go anywhere too far. Boop. Hang tight 1 second, and we'll bring you back. We're talking to Westerlay Orchids, and oh my gosh, look at all the stuff we have to look at. All right, I have 1, 2, 3 more ad reads to do. One is a show. Deanna Shaws has the show Intercultural Spark. It is Thursdays, that's tomorrow, live at 10 a.m. Central Time. Go watch and see what's going on with Deanna's show. There's a lot to cover, and she has really good interviews with guests and has lots of interesting things going on. Another is, hey, do you like podcasts? Me too. Well, if you want to get an audio podcast version of the show, we are everywhere that you can find a podcast. But if you want to put together your own podcast, you can get hosted at castos.com. Super easy, castos.com. It's not an orchid, but it'll do. Want to use a search engine that's not Google? I mean, who doesn't? Go to presearch.com. You can have a really cool experience. You can look at things a whole different way. Presearch.com, if you sign up and get a free account, you start earning crypto just by using your searches. And then you can start using those crypto rewards to maybe stake a keyword like orchid. So there's a lot to go with that. So presearch.com, and always thank our friend Kate for sponsoring the show. Kate does this every single week, it seems, lately. So thank you so much for sponsoring presearch.com. All right, let me grab one Jeff Karpman, one Grace Hanna. Welcome back. See, that wasn't too painful. We all lived all the way through it. Janice says, I knew a couple of people who grew orchids, and it's amazing to hear the stories about how people used to find and collect orchids. I don't know anything about this, except, again, I read the Susan Orlean book. There must be quite a distance between what it takes to make a commercial operation like this versus, you know, walking through the woods and finding one hiding behind a tree or something like that.
Yeah, well, Jeff might know more about this than I do, but the last I checked, there's over 25,000 species of orchids all over the world. So there's almost an endless supply of different variations and colors and species. It's a really diverse group, and there's some really cool ones. We obviously mostly grow Phalaenopsis, but we've also, looked at some of the other ones, and we get to see them. Vandas and Dendrobiums, I think is the name. Anyway, there's a lot of different kinds and colors, but in terms of selecting, there's a whole breeding process for that. And Jeff might know more about it than I do, but yeah. Yeah,
I would say that, the commercial aspect of it is much different than the collector. There's the Santa Barbara International Orchid Show, which is, they had their 75th anniversary last year, unfortunately during COVID. So I believe they're going to have it in person coming up this year. But there's a big gap between the orchid collector and just your retail orchid purchaser. The retail orchid purchaser tends to just want something to spruce up their house, something to liven up their office space. The orchid collector is a whole nother breed. And when you walk some of these shows and you see some of these varieties that are north of $1,000 per plant, and you have orchid hunters and you have orchid traders and things of that nature, it's definitely a different experience. But I also heard something that I didn't know, but orchids were the first known flowering plant on planet Earth. So there was a time when there was no flowering plants. There was just green plants, and there was no pollination via insects, and orchids were identified as the first flowering plant on our lovely planet. So pretty cool to be part of that history.
Wow, that's pretty intense. Janice has a question. Do you have videos or tutorials on how to care for them? And Elizabeth seconds the motion on that.
Yeah, we do. If you go to our website, westerlay.com, there's an orchid care section, and there's some helpful videos on there from Candy, actually, the one of the owners at Westerlay. And she does some really helpful videos on watering and how to fertilize and where to put your orchid in your home, that sort of thing. So I would recommend you check them out.
That is awesome. Thank you for letting us know that. I'm bringing it up on screen.
Perfect.
I'm lucky. Oh, here's easy instructions and whatnot. So let's see. Push a button, Brogan. There we go. So there's care, placement, light, water, fertilizer, continuing care, download a print, some other stuff about different ones. And then look right there, a little video on what to do when you bring your orchid home. As I was listening to you talk about the idea of this, three thoughts came to mind at the same time. One was quality control. What's that process like? What's that involved? It's got to be pretty crazy.
Yeah, we have a great team. So we have a team of about 100 people that work in the greenhouse, and there's a great leadership model where we train to what we call scouting. So scouting and specking out orchids. So every variety, every size has a certain parameter that it has to meet. Size of the spike or height of the spike, size of the leaves, number of buds per spike, etc. And each variety varies a little bit. So what we do is we bring in a test quantity, a couple thousand plants, and we grow them for the full cycle, and then we grade them based upon what we consider to be A or A plus parameters. And then if they pass the grade, then the subsequent year, if we like, the color, the variety, how it looks, how it performs, scrap rate, a bunch of different parameters that we scorecard, then we decide to either bring it in the mix or not. And then, of course, when you bring in a plant into the mix, you have to look at the least performers from the past cycle that were in the mass production flow. And then we cycle in and we cycle out of plants on a periodic basis, just looking for the hardiest plants, the ones that grow the fastest, have the best leaves, most resistance to any type of pest. So there's a lot of varieties that sort of move through the flow at Westerlay.
That was intense to listen to. As you were saying it, I mean, I'm way back on when you said A and A plus, and I thought, well, what do you do with the B minuses and stuff like that? Do they get dumped to some other place, or it must be pretty intense to go through all that. But as it applies to your sustainability and all those sorts of plans, what does happen with the concept of the scrap and all that? What do you do with the broken guys and the ones who fall down and whatever happens? What happens with all that plant matter?
Sure. So we recycle what we can, and then we compost the rest. So just normal industry recycling and composting, and there's a surprisingly low amount of scrap. We actually for producing 4 million plants, we only scrap about 3,000 per week.
Wow.
So it's not a lot of plants. So part of the scouting out the best varieties is to pick plants that are the hardiest plants that won't have issues through the cycle, because we want to limit the amount of scrap that we have. We're spending quite a bit of time and energy on growing these plants. We want to mitigate the scrap throughout the process.
I just found myself thinking about the fact that I know you both intend to retire from there when you're very old, because I can't imagine you ever having to look at something as difficult as shipping toilets or rocks or things like that after all the work that it takes to move orchids around. That's pretty intense. You mentioned some of the process in the training and the scouting and teaching people how to understand all of that. Is there even further a process? Well, like in spirits, there's brewmasters and things like that, and they help teach people how to make the best bourbon and all that. Is there a similar kind of apprenticeship kind of a scenario? It's a family-run business, Westerlay. So is that just handed down from generations, or what does it take to become the master person deciding what's what around there?
I think that's one of the beauties about agriculture is it's an undervalued, underserviced space, and so whereas you have to have a degree to rise to the top, being a physician, lawyer, etc. You can very well be an intern or start at the bottom and then learn from one of our master growers and just through the knowledge, the inherent knowledge of working day in and day out and learning about the business and the plants, you can ascend to becoming a growing master and either become a leadership position with the company, or you can move on to take that reins at another growing operation. But there's definitely a lot of training on the job. You don't have to walk in with a horticultural degree and have a master's. There's a bottom up option.
I missed asking this one earlier, but are there still orchids out there waiting to be discovered?
I'm sure there are. I mean, I can't imagine that we've discovered all of them so far, but I don't know. We'd have to talk to a real expert on that.
You got me. Do you know where they live in general? Like when they're left to their own devices? Because if they're the first plant on the world, does that mean they were lots of places, or just in a sort of a temperate zone, or where do they like to live?
So they're all over the place, primarily in tropical regions. So there's in the continent of Africa, there's multiple varieties that come from there. Indonesia has quite a few, Brazil, countries around those areas also have quite a few. I know China is where I think a lot of the red varieties come from China, but yeah, it's really diverse. So, orchids have adapted to be in lots of different climates and locations, but they are primarily in tropical regions. Yeah.
Are you engineering any orchids at Westerlay or elsewhere? Like, I mean, how much of it is, I just made the pluot of orchids or something? Does that happen much?
We're not. So we don't breed or propagate any orchids ourselves. We do work with our suppliers to always sort of push them to give us what's the best thing. So we're definitely not sitting back and just accepting what's passed along our way. So we're always pushing what's the next thing, what's the next color, what's the next variety. Can we get a more vibrant red? Can we have a taller 3-inch? Can we have a hardier product? Can we have variegated leaves? I mean, there's various things that we're constantly pushing, and really, I mean, that's how the whole industry progresses. If we just push and we ask for more, and we extend what's happening on the market and what we're seeing in other areas into orchids, and it also extends to the design side of things with the arrangements and the gardens and the ceramics, and you'd be surprised. On the ceramic side of things, people always say, you're buying an orchid, but if the pot doesn't look great and it's not appropriate for your home environment, if it's not elegant, if it's not universally colorized, then really you're going to have some issues selling the plants in general. So sort of one hand covers the other, and but we're constantly pushing for that innovation.
That's interesting too. It's like picture framing. It's that whole notion that, if you have an incredible print and you just throw it in any old frame, it's not going to be so great. So if I have a red Solo party cup, that maybe isn't the best thing to deliver the orchid in, is your point. So how do you get beyond just a simple white ceramic vase? I saw some of that, if I find it super fast, on the Instagram with like a fire truck and all those sorts of things and themes. Do you see heading in that direction a little bit? That sort of, I don't know, Build-A-Bear with orchids?
So we do have some seasonal specific ceramics and pots. For example, back to school, you might have a little pencil holder, as a pot. So we tend to be a little bit more classically inspired, because our brand image is more classical and everyday use. But we do venture off into the novelty a little bit. We might have an Easter egg or a mock ceramic Easter egg for Easter, or a heart pot for Valentine's. But I would say that the vast majority of our sales come from a more traditional, elegant look.
You won't be licensing to Rick and Morty anytime soon. Is what I just heard out of that. All right, we're heading towards the end of the show, so I'm going to do a couple things real quick. I am going to find our person of the day.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
So I already told you didn't necessarily have to read along, but there sure was quite a story going along as this came to happen. So I have to find the start of the story. Leslie says, this will be Leslie's person of the day. I have a coworker who had a beautiful orchid that we have now named Stick. So I guess that doesn't sound like it is going to work so well. And by nature, Janice mentioned that we had one in the office that we left alone. We just put ice cubes on it once a week. And evidently stick is in intensive rehab. So the other lesson learned was that orchids don't like coffee, like a jalapeno. So now there's a lot of questions on what happened to stick. So I'm going to give it to Leslie for that reason. She's person of the day. Now we're at the question that I've asked every guest who's ever been on this show, which is what goes in your backpack? This could be something physical, like a delicious bottle of whiskey to take up the top of a mountain. It could be something metaphorical, like, hope and dreams for the future, or maybe, I don't know, kindness. So I'll ask the question. I'm going to go Grace Hanna first. Grace, what goes in your backpack?
So I'm a trail runner, distance runner. So I'd probably bring my tennis shoes. I run in Saucony Kinvaras. That's probably that's my choice.
That's a good little beast of a piece of footwear as well. I liked trail running a lot. I did a trail marathon back in 2004, and halfway through it, my how the technical shoelaces have those little doodahs and pull-ons, and you can't exactly just change a shoelace, it turns out. I had that happen midway through, so I guess I would have brought extra shoelaces. I like Kinvaras it is. Jeff Karpman, what goes in your backpack?
I think tickets to go around the world and some camera gear would be great. I'm a camera hobbyist, a photography guy, so I would definitely like to do that.
Now, are you a film camera guy, or are you doing digitals? Like real
digital
people?
Yeah, not a traditional film person. Yeah.
And what do you shoot? Canon, or what's your?
I shoot Fuji. I have an X-T4 right now, and also an X100F. So.
Those are some beautiful little rigs, and they do the job. My gosh, the kind of work you get out of those. That's great. I feel for Leslie and stick, because my grandmother was absolutely the worst. She could grow spider plants all day, but heaven forbid you give this woman anything that requires a little bit of work. She had these sort of French Canadian tips on how she could do things a little bit better. But I learned after a while that my grandfather was in on the secret of how she kept her plants so fresh looking.